this is the first live episode of Grind and Inspire, and I'm super excited to have Wayne Gates here with me. Today, we're going to be taking a journey through the heartlands of rural America. So invite you to join us on this eye-opening conversation that I will be having with Wayne Gates, who is the Municipal Village Administrator of Ripley, Ohio. And we're going to dive into common challenges and some innovative opportunities that resonate with rural communities everywhere. So if you're from our local area, welcome. You kind of know some of the opportunities and the challenges that we face in this area. But if you're from another rural area, I would say that you are facing some of the same opportunities, whether you're rolling in the hills of the Midwest or somewhere in the South. Rural communities share a unique spirit. And so we're going to talk a little bit about this today. And Wayne, I'm going to let you kind of jump in and tell everybody just a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, as the village administrator in smaller villages or cities or towns or whatever nomenclature that you want to use, I am essentially the person that is responsible for the day-to-day administration of the village. Our mayor is not a full-time mayor, and we don't have a huge administrative infrastructure. So in a village of this size, it's approximately 1,500 people. I am the economic development director. I am the code enforcer. I am the person that cleans the bathroom before the council meetings. It's just kind of a one-man show, but all of the things that I do here in the village are done at larger municipalities. It's just on a smaller scale.
Now, for people that are not in a rural area, they probably are like, wow, okay, that's a lot of hats to be wearing. I mean, you and I both are in the same general area, so that's just how it is around here, and if you're listening from another rural area, I would say that your area is similar. And again, there are challenges with that, because I'm sure if you're cleaning the bathroom, getting ready for something, that's taking you away from other things that could be furthering the area. But that is kind of some of the challenges that rural communities face. I do want to ask you, for people that are listening that maybe don't understand anything about some of these areas, can you share a little bit about just the unique character and the charm of rural communities like the one that you work in, and also maybe explain how they're different from urban areas?
Well, sure. Probably the biggest difference between an urban area and a rural area like this one is the lack of institutional knowledge that people can kind of count on. If you're in an urban area, particularly within a circle of professionals that kind of do the same work that you do, you can kind of speak in shorthand and you get the networking opportunities, and you're kind of aware of ways to grow as they come up. But in a rural area, those nexes of discussion and expertise are a little bit further spread out, because you may find someone in your village that has particular expertise in one area. For example, my journey before I got here was in the news media. I was working in newspapers at the time that I took this job, but I also have television, news, and radio experience. And so I'm very comfortable with the idea of talking to the public, talking in public, some of the social media marketing and things like that are done. But there are other counterparts that I have in other villages that don't have any exposure to that world whatsoever, but they may have some expertise that I do not. So we kind of share information, we network to a degree, because people in my role often reach out to each other to ask questions. Who do you have your insurance with, or what would you recommend in this situation, or have you been through this before, that sort of thing. So we also share information, but there's less of a structure to it. There aren't any professional organizations to join, that sort of thing. So that's one of the primary challenges, is a bit we're more on intellectual and experience islands in rural areas than we are where people are in urban or suburban areas.
Absolutely. Well, and you know a little bit about my background of having my office near the city and kind of starting things there. And it definitely is a little bit of a different, I guess, world on starting a business in an area like that opposed to having a business out here. And I think that people that are in more urban areas don't realize some of the extra challenges that the more rural communities do face. And much like you said, there is not any professional business organizations really tap into. There are the chambers now, which, some of those are kind of, they're not new, but they're newer in functionality now at this point. And I know there's the Brown County Chamber in Georgetown and Adams County Chamber in West Union that are now starting to kind of like branch out and are tapping into some of the local small businesses. But again, they're like a lot of other rural areas. They're understaffed, and I'm saying staffed as in I guess under volunteered. They don't have a lot of people that are able to jump in and kind of take on a lot of these roles because they're a lot of the people in this area that are in the professional capacity are working throughout the day or they're driving to the city to work. And I know you and I have talked about this topic multiple times, and just about that it is an aging population in this area, like many rural areas, and the younger population is driving 45 minutes an hour, sometimes up to 2 hours. I know lots of people that drive toward Columbus area, which is 2 hours from us, again, which pulls those people away from this area to where they can't tap in and try to help with some of these things that need help with. Now I do want to ask you, what do you think are some solutions to some of these problems that we do face out here?
Well, we've kind of talked around it, and the logical solution first is collaboration,
Mm-hmm.
because we, as people have heard me talk about before, I'm honored to be on the board of directors of the Brown County Chamber of Commerce, working primarily with economic development and tourism ideas. But if we don't start working together and using the unique skill sets that we have, then we are going to end up in a situation where we have been in this area and in other areas in the past, where everyone is staying in their own little silo and wanting to develop. I want to develop mine, but I don't want it to come at my expense if you develop yours, because you get people that get, I don't want to use the word defensive or territorial, but let's face it, we've all met people that are exactly that.
Yeah.
And if you have an idea where you're going to collaborate, if I succeed, you succeed. For example, Georgetown, Ohio is 15 minutes up the road from us, has a very rich historical background, and is fortunate to be the boyhood home of President Ulysses S. Grant. So anyone that is interested in Civil War history is going to be drawn to Georgetown. However, Ripley has a rich Underground Railroad history, which is also ties right into the Civil War. So anyone that's interested enough to come to our area from out of state to come to Georgetown would naturally want to come to Ripley, and vice versa. So it's only to the benefit of both villages and both economies to cross promote each other instead of competing with each other.
Why do you think that people have this mentality of the competition in smaller areas? I know, again, we've kind of talked about this offline several times, and it baffles me because in the more urban areas, it's become, I guess, just a way of life that you do collaborate and you do work together. And I think in the more urban areas, they've had to do that for longer periods of time to the point that that's just how it is. And so new businesses come along and that's just how it is. They plug into, the local business organizations, and everybody knows that you just collaborate, you network, you collaborate. It's just kind of the way of life. I've been involved in it.
Well,
And go ahead. I'm sorry.
well, every individual, of course, let me make this caveat. Every individual and every situation is different. People, you can't pigeonhole people and you can't put them in boxes. So what I'm trying to do is speak in general terms, but I'm not trying to talk down about any
Oh, no.
particular group or type of people or anything like that. So with that out of the way, I think that there are a couple of issues here. First of all, I think it's cultural. I think that, especially in Appalachian culture, even though the United States is pretty much a homogenous culture anymore, but you have the idea of, I am a little bit more independent. I live in this rural community because I choose to, or because my family has. So it's mine. It's my area. I have a emotional connection to where I live, and I want to succeed. So that's where I think some of the, I don't want to use the term defensiveness, but some of the desire to succeed first locally comes from, is because it's an idea that people's sense of self are wrapped up in and intertwined with the community where they live. I I'm not from Ripley, I am Ripley, and my family is Ripley, if that makes any sense to
It
you.
does. Yeah.
And it's also generational to a degree, because the newer generation, anybody that's under 40, they are more comfortable communicating with people on their phones than they are communicating with people that live right next door to them. And I think that's a societal shift that goes beyond just this narrow application. I think that our society has permanently changed with the advent of smartphones and computers and social media and things like that. People are less shy about sharing information. They're less shy about confronting people, but it's comfortable when you do it from behind your keyboard, but they are consequently less willing to have productive face-to-face discussions where they resolve conflict and try to collaborate and things like that. So you've got older people who don't hesitate to talk to people, and you've got younger people who do. And then you have the cross-generational conflict where, and I think that's kind of been fanned by the flames of social media and culture as well, because okay, boomer versus you darn kids. And you end up with people kind of withdrawing into their own tighter circle, whether that is family or whether it's hometown or whether it's generation or a level of interest in a certain topic. So getting people to be comfortable with the idea of putting themselves out there, maybe having a discussion with somebody that they might disagree with. Who knows, you might be able to find some common ground and find a solution that benefits both, but you have to be willing to take that step. You can't just sit back and wait for things to happen and then blame somebody else if it doesn't happen.
No, absolutely. Well, and I was thinking while you were kind of talking about some of these things, just going back to what you said about, I don't live in Ripley, I am Ripley. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That could be used in a very positive manner. But I think what ends up happening a lot of times is we forget that there's so many different perspectives to, well, just life in general. And it's okay that you have this like deep seated emotional bond to an area, because that actually can be great, right? If you love an area and you care about an area, you want to what's best for the area. I think the disagreement and misunderstandings come in with the not realizing that we all basically want the same thing. I say this all the time, like in any of the shows I'm in, because it is. If we could realize as humans that we all actually want the same basic things. We want to be happy and healthy. We want our families to be happy and healthy. We do. So it's like, if we know that at a core level, then the question becomes, well, how do we get there? And that's usually where there's different perspectives and disagreements and all of that comes into play. And I think if we keep rewinding it back to, okay, well, wait, we all want the same thing, and then discussing some opportunities on how we get there. I do want to ask you, like, obviously we talked about that rural communities face challenges. One of those is retail centralization. And we mentioned earlier the migration of younger residents to urban areas. How do you think that these challenges impact our economic landscape in areas like ours and in other rural areas in the US and beyond? And also, what strategies have you seen that have been used to effectively address them?
Well, one big issue that we in the village of Ripley are facing that is not unique to anyone at all is, as you just mentioned it, the centralization of retail. In the past 50 years or so, the retail landscape has changed significantly, even prior to the internet and online shopping. Amazon.com obviously didn't exist 30 years ago, but Walmart did. And every town doesn't need its own hardware store and its own grocery store and everything else like that. Those days are gone. But since Ripley is in Ohio, which was settled in, the statehood was in 1803, and Ripley is about that old. Ripley is very nearly 200 years old. So there are a lot of buildings downtown that are 150 years old, but they're not occupied because there aren't enough businesses to occupy them, and there aren't enough people that want to live in them. And the people that are here don't have the funds to turn those buildings into something that would be attractive unless there is some reason to bring people to the area. And Ripley's economic future depends on tourism, historical tourism from the U.S. Grant and the Civil War history. Grant was actually in school here in Ripley for a couple of years, being taught by one of the leaders of the Underground Railroad movement, which is just like a historical nugget. But we also have the Ohio River. We have opportunities for kayaking, for boating, that sort of thing. So if you're going to focus on drawing historical and recreational tourism, then you have to turn your economy, and not only that, but the image of the village to the outside world has to be conducive to bringing people to the area. So a regional strategy on branding, marketing, and tourism has to be in place. Everybody has to kind of be singing the same song. We can disagree behind closed doors on how to put a strategy forward, but when we're facing the public, it's time to put our smiles on and work hard and cooperate. We disagree out of public view, but when we're in public view, we all have to be pulling in the same direction. So everybody, whether they realize it or not, or whether they want to be that or not, everybody in rural communities is a marketing representative of that community. You will leave an impression with visitors, whether or not you want to or not. There will be an impression left. So it's up to you to make sure it's a positive one. And if it's not, then you end up taking responsibility for the negative impression as much as you would like to take responsibility for the positive one. So the world moves faster these days, with communication, with ideas, with everything else. So people who wish things were like they used to be, some of those things are not as functional today as they were a few years ago, because the idea of getting people to move here, for example, is more possible now than it was 20 or 30 years ago, because with the advent of COVID and working from home and that sort of thing, if the working world continues to move in the direction that it is for some industries, there's no reason why somebody who works in a service or information type job couldn't buy a house in Ripley, work from home, and then get off work, and their commute is a 30-second walk to their front door, and then they're sitting on the river.
No, absolutely. Well, and I think that that's the case for lots of areas. I know, I can't remember the percentage, but I was reading something about a week or two ago that commercial buildings as a whole have decreased in value, even in like larger, urban areas. And the reason is because, again, much to your point of COVID, during COVID, a lot of these companies figured out, oh, my workforce can work from home and I can save all of this money, and so my profit margins be way better. And, employees figured out, oh, okay, well, I can work from home, still make the same amount of money, and have a little bit more of a work-life balance. And so, much to your point of saying that we can't kind of go back to the way things were. I don't know that we necessarily would want to. I know there's some things that I even think about, like, oh, I wish it was the same way as like back in the day. And there's some of these things that nostalgia, brings up in our minds. But I don't know that as a society that we really know what we're asking for in those manners, because we have become so accustomed to the convenience of a lot of these technology driven assets that we have. And so love it, hate it, or whatever in between. I mean, we're using them now. We're using them right now to be able to have this conversation. And so, I mean, there's benefits to these things, right? There's benefits to being able to utilize these things, but there's negatives. With everything comes a positive and a negative. And I know earlier you were talking about, not as many people wanting to go and have, conversations and, person to person conversations. And I think we have to realize as communities that it's okay to utilize both. Use the convenience, to be able to use some of these technology driven assets to be able to save time, save money, further reach, further our networking out. But don't forget that there's still so much benefit in that face to face interaction and community driven growth. I know economic development often involves obviously attracting in new businesses and industries to a region. And I know we've discussed some of the challenges to rural areas like ours, but have you seen any successful strategies for kind of luring businesses into rural communities without compromising their unique character of that area?
I think at some point you have to make a choice as a community. Are we going to try to grow, or are we going to try to maintain the atmosphere that we want to maintain, knowing that we are giving up on potential economic opportunity if we choose to do so? Because that, I think, is the big debate in a lot of small communities. There are a number of examples of communities that have gone all in on tourism. Augusta, Kentucky, for an example. Ripley is kind of moving in that direction, because if you try to become a tourist destination with entertainment, with restaurants, with all of that other stuff, the price you pay for that economic development is being a tourist town. People are going to show up, they're going to stay for 2 or 3 days, and they're going to go. And that's what your focus has to be. I mean, if you look at Branson, Missouri, everybody knows where Branson is and everybody knows what Branson's about. As soon as I say the word Branson, you get this idea in your head, which Branson has worked very hard over the past 30 or 40 years to cultivate.
Yeah.
And it takes that long for it to sink into people. If you woke up tomorrow and said, let's go to Branson, then you know what you're going for. But if someone said, let's go to Ripley, where's Ripley? What's Ripley? So you have to answer what's Ripley in people's minds, and then you can get them to where's Ripley. Okay, I'm going to go there. I'm going to make the decision to get in my car and drive 1, 2, 3 hours and come and experience what Ripley has to offer, whether that's a new restaurant, whether it's the river, whether it's the Underground Railroad history, whatever is drawing those people into the village. You want to be able to show them the other assets that they may not be aware of, and then sort of lead them down that path. I keep telling people, if you get them here once, they'll come back, but you have to know who your audience is, first of all. You have to know what your message is that you want them to receive. And you have to know where your audience is. Where do I reach them? Do I do it through an app, through a QR code? Do I buy an ad in a magazine with a QR code for the audience? Do I do social media with geotagging or post boosting? Do I try to do it with free social media work, like publishing a picture of a sunset or a blog post? How do we use our website to do that? Is our website focused on purely tourism and economic development, or do we have a separate website? It's like we have villageofripley.com. Do we come up with visitripley.com that's solely devoted to tourism, or do we have that as a section of our own municipal website? All of those detailed questions are what you have to answer. You have to have a plan, and you have to have a way that you're going to move forward. You can't just walk out your front door and say, man, that river's pretty. I hope people come visit it. You have to give them a reason to come, and you have to know what you want them to do when they get here. And then you want to know how you're going to get them to come back.
No, 100%. And, I think for all the people that are out there listening right now that, again, that are maybe from more urban areas, maybe they're asking, well, what's the point? Like, what's the point in trying to revive some of these quote unquote dead towns, these dead communities? What is the point? Can you tell me, just from your own perspective, what are some of the reasons that rural communities are so important, not only to their own area, but to area like statewide, US wide, like just life? Like what from your opinion, what is the reason for the rural communities?
Well, one of the phrases that you hear in the real estate community is that you need to buy land because they're not making any more of it. As the population grows, as houses in Cincinnati that would cost $750,000 are $125,000 out here for the same square footage. And if you can work from your computer and you're willing to drive 30 minutes to work, your cost of survival is lower in rural communities than it is in the urban areas. That's why the suburban areas are continuing to grow. That's why Claremont County has 200,000 people in it, when 30 or 40 years ago, it was half that. And Brown County is growing, albeit at a slower pace. Anybody that goes through Mount Orab can know and see visually that that is the retail center, not only of Brown County, but from Southern Highland, Clinton County, Adams County. People are willing to drive 30 minutes to go to that centralized retail location. So if they're willing to travel 30 minutes to shop, are they willing to travel 30 minutes to live? Somebody that lives in Cincinnati, it's a smaller example of, I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase equity bandits, but somebody in California can sell a home for $1.5 million and move to the Midwest and buy one for $250,000. So it's the same situation in Cincinnati. If you're tired of the traffic, if you're tired of the denser areas of population, sell your house, drive to Brown County, buy one for half of what you paid for it out there, put the rest of the money in the bank, and enjoy the sunsets.
Absolutely. Well, and obviously I live out here, so I love it out here. And, for people that are maybe in the rural communities and they're like, no, wait, we don't want everybody moving out here, what would you have to say to them? Because I know, again, you and I have had these conversations offline, but I think it's important for people that are listening to understand that there are really good reasons to invite people out to our rural areas.
Well, let's talk about, if we're going to continue to talk about economics and real estate, your house isn't worth what it's appraised for. It's worth what somebody will give you for it.
Yes.
And if there is a demand for housing in this rural area, if people want to live here, then your home will eventually be worth more to you and your children than if nobody wanted to live here. And there has to be a reason for people to want to be in a rural area, regardless of what it is. You can't continue the cycle of kids graduating high school, leaving the area, and never coming back. That's why if your population is going to drop by 25 or 50 people a year, and eventually your school is going to have to shrink or consolidate. And that's how communities die. You have to have new blood. You have to have people that want to buy a house, that want to live here, that want to start a small business. You don't necessarily have to try to start a hardware store because people can drive to Lowe's, but you can start a niche business. You could start an antique store. You could start something that would attract a candy store. If you think that, hey, 2 years from now, when we get our $3 million dock built, and hopefully with the Appalachian Community Grant process we're having, then we have a multi-million-dollar development down there specifically designed for people to enjoy river access, then you're thinking, well, maybe I'll buy that building over there and put an antique store in, because people with money are going to be coming here and they're going to want something else to do other than sit and watch the sunset or take a kayak ride or eat in the restaurant. They're going to want something else to do. And if one or two businesses come, two or three more will come, because we all know that the analytics, it's all about traffic count and foot count. And as that continues to grow, the success will continue to grow. So I think Ripley is poised to enter a new era of economic prosperity because we have all of these things coming together at the same time. We have the Appalachian Community Grant Program, which is a $25 million project that we're going to find out whether or not we get awarded in March of next year. We already have the dock project paid for, which is $3 million. And then we have the river itself, we have the Underground Railroad history, we have the proximity to Cincinnati. So all of those factors together are going to intertwine and have synergy and allow us to succeed. Now, the challenge that other rural areas have, other smaller towns, is what's our hook? What can we do that is unique? How can we position ourselves to make someone want to come here in the first place, to make them want to stay, and to invest their time and their money and their interest into making rural community X also a success? I think that's the real question, and that's something that every rural community has to answer for itself. Where are we now? Where do we want to go? How are we going to get there? And what are we willing to do to make it happen?
Absolutely. Well, and I know there is a level of being a visionary within there, because as you know, I am a small business owner in our rural community, and I know some of my friends that are not from this community, when I started some of these projects, are like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? And I'm quoting them, out in the middle of nowhere. But I see the vision, right? I see the opportunities, and I see what I know it can be. I mean, it's doing fine now, but I know what it can be in the future. So I think it takes a level of being able to envision and kind of dream. And entrepreneurs are dreamers. And I think that for me, these rural areas are the perfect canvas to kind of paint upon, because you have more opportunity to be able to dream bigger and more in detail than in some of the areas that have already been decided, quote unquote, what it is and what they're doing. You know, you have an actual canvas to create on. And for me, that is intriguing. And like you said, obviously the cost to start it out here is a whole lot less, which is also intriguing for entrepreneurs. But I want to ask you, in the pursuit of the rural economic development for areas like ours, what role do you think local businesses play, and how do you think that they can be supported and even encouraged to thrive, because it's not easy?
Well, local businesses have, again, the same choice that local people had. Do I want to work with others, or do I want to try to succeed on my own and be able to keep all of the benefits for myself? And honestly, I think the go it alone philosophy is short-sighted, because if business A succeeds in drawing more people in, then some of them are naturally going to migrate down the street to businesses B and C. So the biggest challenge that I think this area and other rural areas face, as I talked about before, is expertise and funding for marketing and advertising. You have to let people that live outside the area know where you are and what you're doing. If I had unlimited funds, for example, and I was trying to promote the Underground Railroad history, the Rankin House, the Parker House, the Civil War history that Ripley has, I would buy billboards and TV ads in places like Louisville or Memphis or Cleveland or places like that that have a high concentration of African Americans who would be emotionally invested in the history of the Underground Railroad. That's one of my audiences. So do I have $5 million to buy billboards in downtown Atlanta? No, I don't. But there is a combination, there's a group synergy of expertise, interest, ability that exists in all rural areas. It's just finding other like-minded people, picking a common goal, and being willing to put in the work. That's the key to all of this.
No, I agree 100%. And I think, well, first of all, if there's any investors out there that want to talk to Wayne and you want to help get some money for some billboards, I'm sure he would love to talk to you. But for our listeners that are passionate about the rural economic development of maybe their own area, and may be facing probably a lot of the similar challenges that we've been talking about today, what advice or words of encouragement would you have to offer them?
Well, we've talked about this. We've used different groups during, but it all comes back to the same concept. Try to find other like-minded people who are as determined as you are to succeed. Find out what they can offer, find out what you can offer, find out who can plug the rest of the holes that you have, and everybody try to pull the wheel in the same direction, whether it's real estate or economic development or tourism or marketing or whatever goal you want to accomplish. You are stronger together than you are separately. So try to put your interests to the side and help your community, your county, your state succeed in a way that it normally couldn't without the effort that you are willing to put in.
No, 100%. And I know I'm a big fan of collaboration. And I say this all the time. And I think people kind of look at me like I'm a little bit crazy, but I don't really believe in competition because even if we do the same thing, if I do the same thing, you do the same thing, 10 other people do the same thing, it's going to be different because we're always going to be putting our own personality, our own tweaks into it. And so there's really no such thing as competition. And so don't be afraid to collaborate. I think sometimes a lot of people are so afraid that somebody's going to quote unquote take their idea. There's very few unique ideas out there. Like,
well, and there's a lot more, there's a lot of competition. We talked about the urban areas when you were talking before. One of the challenges of living in an urban area is if I decide tomorrow that I don't want to be a village administrator anymore, I want to be a marketing and media consultant. I could do that. I have the experience, I have the education to do that. But in an urban area, there's already 100 people that are doing that. They already have clients, they already have the ability to renew contracts and things like that. And that's a door that I'm knocking on that has a lot more people and challenges behind it. But if I were to try to do that in Adams or Highland County, yes, there's fewer businesses to talk to, but there's also less competition to try to succeed. And at that point, it would be up to me to perform to a level that I would want to be retained, and then word of mouth. And you know how that works. Networking is at the center of all success when it comes right down to it. If somebody hires me and I do a bad job, I'm not going to get hired again. But if I do a good job and get recommended, then that's the successful path. And that can come from a restaurant, it could come from a retail store, it could come from just about any area that you would want it to come from. And again, turning back again to what I've said about 6 times now, it's about collaboration and cooperation.
100%. And I know as we wrap up this enlightening conversation that we've been able to have today, I'm reminded of just the incredible resilience and potential that actually exists in these rural communities. I love these areas. I'm passionate about these areas. I talk about these areas all the time, probably to the point that a lot of my urban friends think I'm completely, wonky, but I love these areas. And, we've explored some of the challenges that some of these rural communities face. And honestly, that's the purpose of the show. I want to give a voice to these rural communities because that's one of the things that I've found just personally is kind of lacking out here. Again, I've been in the more urban areas. I've got my shows that I run now from my rural office, and I wanted to be able to utilize this as an outlet. But there is such an innovative spirit in these rural communities. It's unwavering, and it's like that not only here but in other rural American areas that I've been to. And there's just some heart and soul in these areas that you can't really find anywhere else. And I want to thank you, first of all, for agreeing to come on here today. This is the first live show we've had, so you're my guinea pig on the live show for this. But your insights have also been invaluable, and I know how passionate you are for rural economic development, not only for Ripley and for Brown County, but just in all areas. And, I think our listeners can take a lot from all the things that you've said today. Is there anything that you want to leave anybody with before we end the show?
Yes, I think so. I said before that we're kind of a homogenous society, which means that we all have the same ideas, we all have the same thoughts. But my one thing that I would like to ask people to do is quit relying so much on the cell phone and start reaching out face to face and building personal relationships. Because when you build relationships of trust and credibility with people, they are more willing to work with you. They're more willing to take a risk. And at the end of the day, if you're not willing to take a risk to try to change things, things are going to remain the same. So it's going to take investment of time, trust, money, emotion, all of these things. And if we find people who have similar ideas to ourselves and they're willing to work with us, then that's how real positive change can happen.
Absolutely. And I can't really, that's a mic drop moment right there. But I do want to say to our listeners, if you're listening to this on the podcast, if you could hit that subscribe button or maybe share this with somebody in your community. And remember that the journey to reviving rural communities isn't just about individual communities. And Wayne's talked a whole lot about collaboration. It is about collaboration in our own communities, in our own states, and even beyond. It's about the collective strength and the determination of anyone who calls rural America home. And it's about helping find some solutions that honor the past while at the same time paving a way for a brighter future, because that's the goal. We're not trying to erase these rural communities and build skyscrapers. We're trying to honor all of that beauty and wonder, and at the same time pave a way for people to have jobs and a brighter future. And I encourage you to take all the lessons from today's episode and maybe figure out a way to apply them in your own communities. It doesn't take much. That's one of the things that I think is, I guess, misunderstood. Yes, if you can shop local some, Amazon's easy. I use Amazon some, but I always try to also shop local, right? Try to shop local. Doesn't mean you don't go to Walmart, doesn't mean all these things, but try to set a certain amount of money aside and shop local. It makes a huge difference in your communities. It makes a huge difference for these small businesses. And together we can celebrate just the character of all of these unique small businesses and the character of just the rural communities in the areas that we live in. So until next time, thank you all so much for joining us today. And Wayne, thank you again for coming on today.
I enjoyed it very much. Thank you, Maria.